Oda called me a danger to myself the same morning I got back from burying my brother. I remember standing in the kitchen, still in the dark slacks I'd worn to the graveside, a cup of coffee going cold on the counter. My brother had been sick for 2 years. I had driven 11 hours round trip, alone, the way I've done most things since my wife passed. 63 years old, and I've learned that grief doesn't wait for convenient timing. Neither, apparently, does betrayal. The call came from my son-in-law, not my daughter herself. That should have told me something right there. He said she was concerned, that she'd been talking to people, that there were things they needed to discuss with me, about the house, about my finances, about whether I was still capable of managing my affairs alone. Capable. I turned that word over in my mouth like a piece of gravel. I had just driven through 2 states without incident. I had organized my brother's service, handled the funeral home, coordinated with his neighbors about his dog. But sitting in my own kitchen in the house I'd owned for 26 years, I was apparently a question mark. I told my son-in-law I'd call back later. He said they'd already spoken to an attorney. I set the phone face down on the counter and stared out the window at the backyard. There's a bird feeder out there. My wife put up the spring before she died. I've refilled it every season since. The birds don't know whose hands fill it. They just know it doesn't dry. I thought about that for a long moment. Then I picked the phone back up and called my own attorney. She didn't answer. I left a message. Short, factual. The way you learn to speak when you're older and you've watched enough things go sideways to know that panic costs more than it's worth. That was a Thursday. By Sunday, I understood the shape of what was happening. My wife and I had built a reasonable life, nothing extravagant. I'd worked in facilities management for the county for 31 years. She'd been a school librarian. We paid off the house in 2009. We had savings, a modest retirement account, a joint brokerage account she'd started years ago that had done better than either of us expected. When she died, everything transferred to me cleanly. We planned it that way. My daughter is our only child. I love her without condition. I also know, the way parents eventually come to know their children, that she has always moved toward comfort, the way water moves toward the lowest point available. It isn't cruelty, it's architecture. She married a man who reinforced every instinct she had about the world owing her something, and the two of them had spent the last decade in a financial fog they kept blaming on circumstances. I had helped them twice. Once when they lost the lease on their first apartment because they'd stopped paying. Once when the car was repossessed and she needed something to get to work. I didn't offer a third time. I told her then, gently but clearly, that I was 62, that I had to think about what I'd need as I got older, that I couldn't keep filling holes that kept reappearing. She said she understood. Her husband did not call me after that conversation for nearly 4 months. I'd taken that as acceptance. I was wrong about that. The Sunday after my brother's burial, my daughter came to the house without calling first. Her husband stayed in the car. That was new. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded and told me she was worried, that I'd been isolating, that I'd missed her daughter's birthday party in March. I'd had a procedure that week, a cardiac catheterization, nothing serious in the end, but it required a recovery day. I'd sent a gift. I'd called. She knew why I hadn't come. I told her that. She said there was a pattern. I asked her what pattern. She said I hadn't been myself since her mother died, that I was making decisions that weren't rational, that people who cared about me were worried. People, plural. I asked her who. She looked at the table. A neighbor, she said. My doctor, she implied, though she used language careful enough not to commit to it. Her husband, she added. Her husband, who had been in the car. I kept my voice level. I've had a lot of practice at that. You spend 31 years managing facilities for a county government. You learn that the loudest man in the room usually ends up doing the most paperwork. I asked her to be specific. What decision had I made that was irrational? She said the trip to my brother's funeral alone at my age with my heart history. My heart history consists of one procedure that came back clean. I take a blood pressure medication. I am not fragile. I told her this. She said I didn't have to get defensive. I wasn't being defensive, I was being precise. There's a difference, and she has never liked that I know it. After she left, I went through the mail I'd let stack up while I was away. There was something in there I nearly missed. A letter from the county probate court, not addressed to me exactly, but with my name on it. A notice of an informal inquiry regarding my capacity to manage financial and personal affairs, filed by a party describing themselves as a concerned family member. I read it twice, then I read it a third time, slower. I'm not a lawyer, but I spent 31 years working inside a government system. I know what paperwork looks like when it has motion behind it. This wasn't a form letter. Someone had initiated something. I called my attorney again. This time she picked up. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. I listed facts the way I was trained to, without decoration, without self-pity. The phone call from my son-in-law, my daughter's visit, the probate notice, my brother's death, the timing. She was quiet for a moment, not confusion, calculation. Then she said, when someone files a capacity inquiry, they're not just expressing worry, they're trying to establish legal standing. Standing for what? I asked. To be appointed your guardian, she said, or conservator over your assets. The word conservator sat in the air between us like something with weight. I understood then what I was looking at. Not concern, construction. A structure built while I was out of state, while I was grieving, while I was distracted by the ordinary and devastating business of losing a sibling. Someone had decided that a 63-year-old man with a clean house, a paid-off mortgage, a healthy brokerage account, and no living spouse was an opportunity. I told her about the brokerage account. She inhaled. "How much?" she asked. "Enough," I said. She said we needed to move quickly, 3 directions at once. First, she said, a formal capacity evaluation, not the court's timeline mine. Get ahead of it. Schedule a cognitive and physical assessment with my own physician, documented, sealed, on record. I can do that today, I said. Second, she said, pull your financial accounts, not close them. Alert the institutions. Flag any changes to beneficiaries, contact information, or authorized users. If anyone has been added without your knowledge, we need to know now. I hadn't thought of that. I should have. I reached for a notepad. Third, she said, the probate inquiry itself. We respond, not emotionally, not angrily, with documentation, medical records, financial statements, daily activity logs if you have them. We build a picture of a man who is doing fine, because you are doing fine. I am, I said. I know, she replied. That's why they moved while you were gone. I didn't sleep well that night. Not from fear, from the specific discomfort of seeing a shape you should have recognized sooner. My daughter had been asking about the house for 2 years, small questions wrapped inside ordinary conversation. Was I thinking about downsizing? Had I considered an over 55 community? Did I know what the property was worth in the current market? I had answered each question as a question, not as reconnaissance. I trusted the explanation. Trust is efficient that way. It fills in gaps without requiring you to look at them. In the morning, I called my doctor's office before 8. His nurse knew my voice. I told her I needed a formal wellness evaluation documented and added to my record as soon as possible. She asked if I was feeling all right. I'm fine, I said. I needed documented that I'm fine. She scheduled me for 2 days out. Then I called the brokerage. Spoke to someone in the client services department. Asked them to review recent activity on my account and flag anything involving changes to contact information or beneficiary designations. There was a pause. Then the woman said she was seeing a pending update request. Pending, I repeated. Yes, she said, submitted 3 days ago, requesting a change to the secondary contact and the mailing address. 3 days ago, I was in another state. I was at my brother's graveside. Cancel it, I said. She confirmed. Then she added a security flag to my account at my request, requiring verbal confirmation for any future changes. I wrote down the reference number. I wrote down her name. I wrote down the time. That afternoon, I drove by the county recorder's office, not to file anything, just to check. I had a thought, the kind that arrives uninvited and won't leave until you've either confirmed or dismissed it. I asked the clerk to pull up my property record. She did, and then she turned the screen slightly toward me without being asked, which told me she'd seen this kind of thing before. There was a recorded document, A quitclaim deed filed 11 days ago naming my daughter as co-owner. I hadn't signed a quitclaim deed. I hadn't been to a notary in over a year. I hadn't agreed to add anyone to the title of my home. I stood at that counter for a long moment. The clerk waited. She didn't say anything. I appreciated that. I asked for a certified copy. I drove home, called my attorney, and read her the document number over the phone. There was a silence. Then she said, "We need to talk about your signature." My signature was on the document. The letters were right. The general shape was familiar. But I have a small inconsistency in the way I close my capital R, a habit I developed in my 40s that anyone who'd seen my signature enough times might attempt to replicate. This one didn't have it. "Not me," I said. "I didn't think so," she said. "We'll need a forensic document examiner." We had a new heading now. It wasn't just a capacity inquiry. It wasn't just a pending account change. Someone had filed a forged deed on my property while I was across 2 state lines, while I was burying my brother, while the reasonable assumption was that I'd be too grief-fogged to notice quickly. That night I called my son-in-law. I hadn't spoken to him directly since his initial call. He answered on the third ring, his voice careful in the way people's voices get when they know a conversation is going to cost something. I didn't raise my voice. I told him I'd been to the recorder's office. I told him I knew about the deed. I told him I knew about the brokerage request. I told him I had an attorney and a court date being scheduled and a forensic examiner lined up. There was a long pause. Then he said, "My daughter was just trying to protect me." "Protect me," I repeated. "Protect my interest," he said, "in case something happened." "Something," I said, "like me being present and alert and completely aware of what's on my own property title." He said I was twisting things. I told him I'd see them in court and ended the call. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the particular heaviness of being right about something you'd hoped you were wrong about. I had raised my daughter in that house. I had taught her to ride a bike in the driveway. I had sat with her through every hard thing a child brings to a parent, and some she never told me about, but I knew were there anyway. I did not believe, even now, that she was purely malicious. I believed she had told herself a story where this made sense, where her father was slipping and she was acting before things got worse, where the forged deed and the probate inquiry and the brokerage change were all part of looking out for someone who couldn't look out for himself. People are very good at building stories that make them the careful one. My physician's evaluation came back clean, cognitively intact, he noted, and added without my asking that I had asked sharp and organized questions throughout the appointment. My blood pressure was slightly elevated, which he attributed to situational stress. He documented everything. My attorney filed a response to the probate inquiry. Attached were the evaluation, 2 years of bank statements, my mortgage payoff documents, evidence of my continued management of the household utilities, my car insurance, my property taxes, all paid on time and without assistance. She also attached a statement from my neighbor across the street, a retired school teacher who had known me for 19 years, confirming that she spoke with me regularly, that I maintained my home, that nothing in my behavior suggested cognitive decline. The brokerage confirmed that no transfers had been completed. The pending changes were cancelled and flagged. Then came the piece I hadn't anticipated. My attorney called on a Tuesday morning, her voice measured in the way it gets when she's about to say something precise. "The quitclaim deed," she said. "We sent it to the examiner. And the signature doesn't match yours. But more importantly, the notary stamp is real." I waited. "The notary is licensed in your county. We contacted her. She has no record of notarizing this document. Her stamp was copied. Someone had access to a document she notarized previously and lifted her seal." "That's forgery," I said. "Multiple counts," my attorney replied. "The deed, the notary seal. We're filing a criminal complaint." I thought about my son-in-law, his careful voice, the way he'd stayed in the car that first Sunday, the way he always calculated exits before entering rooms. "Was my daughter involved?" I asked. There was a pause. "I don't know yet," she said. "But her name is on the deed. That's a problem for her regardless of what she knew." I understood that. The criminal complaint was filed on a Wednesday. My son-in-law was interviewed by a detective on Friday. I know this because my daughter called me that evening. her voice different from any version of it I'd heard before, not calculating, not managed, just frightened. "Dad," she said. I waited. "I didn't know he was going to do that," she said. "The deed. I didn't know about the notary. He said it was a precaution. He said you wouldn't have to know about it right away." I said nothing. She kept going. She told me he had been the one to contact the probate court, that he had done it from the computer at their house, using an email address she didn't know about, that she had asked him to talk to me about finances, but hadn't told him to file anything, hadn't told him to forge anything, hadn't known that's what came next. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. Part of me also understood that it didn't fully matter, not for the legal questions, and not for the quieter question of how much I'd been seen, in my own family, as a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. I told her I heard her. She asked if I would talk to her, really talk. "Not yet," I said. "Not until this is resolved. There are things I need to take care of first, and I need to take care of them clearly." She started to cry. I let her. Then I said gently, "Because she is still my daughter, and I have never stopped loving her even when she gave me reason to. You should get your own attorney, not your husband's. Yours." She went quiet. "I'm serious," I said. "Call someone tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time. The house was quiet, the way it gets in the evenings, the particular silence of a space that holds all your history and doesn't comment on any of it. I'd lived in this house through a marriage, a career, a retirement, a death, a grief that I'm still carrying in the parts of me that don't show. I had made meals in the kitchen and fixed the porch railing 3 times and replaced the water heater twice and argued about paint colors and won once and lost twice, and all of it was still here, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the shape of the chair I always sit in. Someone had decided that this house, this life, this man sitting alone in it was an unattended situation. They were wrong about that. The probate inquiry was dismissed 2 weeks later. My attorney filed the medical evaluation, the financial records, the documented forgery report, and the criminal complaint reference number. The court issued a brief notice. No evidence of incapacity found. Matter closed. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. Celebrations are for things you gained. I had only recovered what was already mine. My son-in-law was charged with 1 count of document forgery and 1 count of fraudulent filing. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case is still moving through the system the way these cases do, slowly, without drama, in rooms where nothing is decided by who cries the loudest. My daughter and I have spoken twice since then. Short calls. She is living with her sister for now. I don't ask about her husband's case. She doesn't bring it up. What we talk about is careful and small. The grandchildren, the weather, a recipe I made that she remembered from childhood. We are feeling for solid ground the way you do after something has shifted under you. I don't know yet how much of what we had survives this. I'm not ready to answer that question. What I know is this. I changed the locks the week after everything was filed, not because I was afraid, because it was the appropriate thing to do when you've learned that people have been treating your home like a transaction. I changed the passwords on every financial account. I added a trusted contact designation at my brokerage, naming my attorney, not a family member. I updated my will. I made appointments with my doctor on a regular schedule. I documented everything, not obsessively, but steadily, the way responsible people do. I also started refilling the bird feeder again. I'd let it run dry for a few weeks without noticing. The birds had stopped coming. They don't hold grudges. They came back within a day once I filled it. 63 is not old. 63 is the age at which you understand clearly that the people who love you are not always the same people as the people who have your best interests at heart. Those 2 groups can overlap. They don't always. Learning the difference is not a failure. It's just the kind of knowledge that arrives when it arrives and costs what it costs. I have spent my whole life being the steady one, the one who doesn't raise his voice, who reads the documents before signing, who keeps records, who shows up. I used to think that was a personality trait. I understand now that it's a form of protection. The world moves fast around quiet men. Things get filed, things get changed, signatures get borrowed without asking. I wasn't going to disappear into someone else's plan for my life. Not at 63, not ever. If you're listening to this and you recognize the shape of it, not necessarily the deed or the court or the specific betrayal, but the feeling of realizing that someone has been measuring your life for their own purposes, I want you to hear this clearly. Grief and age and solitude do not make you a smaller version of yourself. They don't make you a resource. They don't make you available. Document what is yours. Know who your people are. And the moment someone uses the word protection to describe something they did without asking you, start asking questions. That's where clarity begins. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after something like this. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness after a storm passes and you're standing in the yard looking at what's still standing. I think about my son-in-law a lot, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of tired clarity. He made choices that followed a logic. He saw an older man living alone, a paid-off house, a brokerage account, no one was watching closely, a grief that had just gotten heavier. He calculated, and what he didn't account for was that the man he was calculating against had spent 31 years inside a system built entirely on documentation, accountability, and the understanding that nothing is real until it's on paper. That's the thing about corners. When someone backs you into one, they assume you'll freeze. What they don't plan for is that you'll use the wall. I've thought about what saved me, and it wasn't luck. It wasn't even the attorney, though she was essential. It was something quieter than that. It was the habit of paying attention, of writing things down, of asking for records, of not assuming that good faith is universal just because it's your preference. That habit isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just a slow accumulation of a man who decided early that he would rather know the truth than be comfortable with a convenient version of it. My daughter made choices too. I believe her when she says she didn't know about the forged deed. I also know that she had been asking about my house for 2 years before any of this happened, and she never once asked me directly what I wanted to do with it. There is a difference between concern and entitlement, and it lives in that gap, the space between asking someone what they need and deciding for them what they should have. She crossed that line without noticing, because my son-in-law had been telling her a story about me for long enough that it started to sound like truth. That's what I want anyone listening to understand. The story someone tells about you, if left unopposed long enough, becomes the version people believe. Not because they're cruel, but because stories are easier than evidence. My job, when that court notice arrived, was not to argue with the story. It was to replace it with facts, one document at a time, until there was no room left for the other version to stand. There's a kind of integrity in that, I think. Not the loud kind. The kind that shows up in the way you've been living all along, in your records, in your receipts, in the fact that your neighbor of 19 years can say without hesitation that you are exactly who you say you are. You can't build that in a crisis. You can only spend a lifetime becoming someone whose life testifies on their behalf. And the endurance part, the part no one talks about, is that none of this resolves quickly or cleanly. The legal case is still moving. My daughter and I are still finding our way back to each other, one careful conversation at a time. The house is mine, but something shifted inside it that takes longer to settle than any court document. What I know is that I didn't disappear. I didn't go quiet because it was easier. I didn't let grief become permission for someone else to rewrite my life while I wasn't looking. 63 years old, and the work of becoming yourself is still not finished. I think that's all right. I think that might be the whole point.